Hello YouTube, this is Umozo3. So in the last video, we learned about wrapper classes, this idea that we could wrap a primitive data type into an object. And we described some of the functionality of the integer, double, Boolean, and character classes, not talking about just the primitive data types, but the classes that wrap those objects. And the reason why we want to have that conversation is because now we're going to talk about another type of data structure that only allows objects to be in it. And it's called an array list. Okay, so you've already heard of an array, and we have essentially a static array which has a fixed length. So once you create an array, if it has 7 elements in it, it must have 7 elements in it forever, exactly 7. We're going to learn about something called a dynamic array or an array list. And essentially an array list allows you to add or remove elements from it. So it's pretty nice functionality in Java to be able to use an array list. And there are some benefits that it has over traditional arrays. And so we're going to learn about 5 of the methods for array lists today, but we're going to do it on strings. And then in the next video, we're going to be looking at array lists of objects, because we cannot forget our discussion of object-oriented programming and the fact that in lessons 22 through 25, we're building up an understanding of this person class. And so we're going to be having an array list of person objects, just like in lesson 25, we had a traditional array of person objects. So without blabbering too much more, let's go ahead and open up our Hello World class. We're going to be outside of the person stuff just for one more lesson. And the first thing we need to do is import something. So we've talked about a lot of special classes in Java. We've talked about string, scanner, math, integer, double, Boolean, and character. So 7 critical classes in Java, and there's going to be another one that we need to be looking at here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to ArrayList Java API. So go ahead and pull that up on your search engine, and we're going to look at the documentation for it. So basically it means that it's a resizable array implementation of the list interface. So it's a list of elements that you're allowed to add and subtract from. It's dynamic, so it's going to start out with 0 elements in it, and you can add as many as you like. And so we're going to be looking at some of the methods, some of the functionality that we have available to us with array lists. And so you can see some of the methods here. So obviously we want to be able to add elements to it. We want to be able to get elements from it. So if we call a particular index position, we want to be able to retrieve the element at that position. We want to be able to see if the list is empty. We want to be able to look at the size of the list, how many elements are in it. So we're going to be studying some of those methods between this lesson and the next one. The first thing that we need to do is import this ArrayList class. Okay, it's not standard, it's not built in. So the only thing you need to do is come up to the top of the class, just like we did for the scanner. But instead of importing the scanner this time, we're going to import the ArrayList. So what you're going to do is you're going to say import java.util.ArrayList. And basically that allows us to access the functionality of the ArrayList class that Java has provided for us. So now that we have that taken care of, we can come down to our main method, our sandbox here, and it looks like we have a couple of static methods. I'm just going to delete them so that they're not distracting. What we're going to do is we're going to create an ArrayList object. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an ArrayList, and we need to specify the object type that's going to be in our ArrayList, because like I said at the beginning of the video, the array list must have objects in it. We cannot have an array list of ints. So you could not have an array list of ints. You'd need to have an array list of integers. And that's why we studied the integer class in the previous lesson. But what we're going to do is an array list of strings. So we're going to say array list of string, type string, and we're going to call it words. And then the way that you initialize it is you're going to say equals new array list, and make sure you get the spelling right. You have a capital A and a capital L. And then you're going to write the type, what data type are you putting into the array list? And then you're just going to have empty parentheses and then a semicolon. So that begins your array list object, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to study some of the methods of the ArrayList class. So then the ArrayList methods to be familiar with, I hope to get through about 5 of them today. Maybe I'll get through like 7 of them today or 8. And then we'll just do a couple more tomorrow, and then, or not tomorrow, but in the next lesson, and put it more into the context of object-oriented programming. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the isEmpty method. We're going to look at the size method, which is, so you can guess at what these are. So this return, returns true if and only if there are 0 elements in the list. And then we have a size method which returns the number of elements in the list. So those are sort of related, as you can probably tell. And then there's going to be an add. So this, inserts elements into the list. And there's actually going to be 2 ways to do that we'll discuss in this video. There's going to be a get method, which retrieves elements from the list, kind of like we wrote a getter method in lesson 22 for the get name and the get age. This is sort of similar, although with get we need to feed in an index position, and we're going to get the elements that's sitting at that index position. There's going to be a clear method, which removes all elements from the list. We will have essentially another one is going to be the contains method, which returns true if a parameterized element, an element that you're inputting into when you call the function, exists in the list. There's also going to be an index of method, kind of like what we saw for the string class. Remember, we can look at the index position of the first occurrence of a substring within a string. And it doesn't have to just be a letter, just any substring within that string. And we remembered that it returns -1 if that substring doesn't exist within the string. But here, index of, we're looking for the index position of the first occurrence of an element within the list. So index of and last index of. And then the last 2 will be set and I think that's actually all of them. I thought there was maybe one more, but I think that's actually it. So it would be the set method. So that allows you to modify elements in the list and basically just change them. So I thought there was, in the remove method, we're going to be able to remove. So remove method. We can just remove one element from the list. Okay, sorry, I was missing that one. Okay, so let's go ahead and start doing, let's start doing some of these things. So we know that words, so what we're going to do is we're going to say system.out.println of words.isEmpty. And so you can see that the isEmpty method is an instance method that does not accept any parameters. Okay, so that's why these parentheses are empty. It's an instance method, so that's why we call it on an instance of the ArrayList class. We're calling it on the words object. And so basically, if we look at the method here, we can go ahead and study this, right? So isEmpty, we can study this. So it says public boolean isEmpty. So that would be the method header in the Java documentation. And so it returns true if the list contains no elements. So at the beginning, I was saying that the list is going to be empty. So now if we go ahead and run the main method, indeed we get true. And so that's sort of basically what we're looking at. And then there's a size method, and that returns the number of elements in the list. So if we go ahead and do words.size, we know that isEmpty would return true if and only if the size method returns 0. So now if we go ahead and run the main method, of course we get true and 0. But that's not very interesting. Let's go ahead and add elements to the array list. So what we're going to do is start adding words in here. So the way that you add words, it's going to be a void method. Well, actually, we can go look at the documentation for it. So if we go look at the documentation, if you have an add, you can go ahead and add an element to the end of the list. So if you do words.add of, let's do August, okay, August. And then what you could do it again. So basically, it'll just add elements to the end of the list. So it'll be August, and then to the right of August is going to be something else. We'll say June, okay? And then for another one, we'll say summer, okay? So those are just strings, and you can see that the data type obviously has to match. The data type of the objects that you're adding has to match the data type of the array list that you declared you were going to be adding elements of that type. You said array list of type strings, so you have to add strings. So now what we can do is take a look at this, because what we can do is we can get one of the values in the array list. So what if we say system.out.print? Actually, let's go ahead and iterate through it with a loop. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for each string W in words. So we've seen a for each loop before, and we said that we can go ahead and write the data type and then an arbitrary name for each element and then colon and then the array. But we can also do this with array lists. So now what we would be looking to do is we would say system.out.println of W. And so we would be able to print each of the words in the array list. And so that's another reason why the for each loop is so nice, is because it's such a straightforward way of iterating through elements in a list. You can say for each element, print the element. If you want to do it with the traditional for loop, we would need to go ahead and call the get method. Okay, so what we would need to do, we're going to say for int q equals 0, q is less than words.size. Remember, we're not talking about dot length. Dot length is for an array, but dot size, now size is a method. Size is a function that it's an instance method that returns an int, right? That returns the number of elements in the list. So here it's going to be 3. And we could just go ahead and iterate through the words, but instead of just saying words of q like we did with an array, we need to say words.get of q. So we know that the way the get method works is it accepts an index position and it returns the element at that index position. So now if we go ahead and compile this code, we can go ahead and run this. So essentially now we run the main method and it would be the same here. We get the same result. So we deleted the for each loop and now we still have that output because we're doing the same thing with a for loop. Just for practice, we could turn this into a while loop just by putting in q equals 0 here. And then what we would do is instead of saying all this for stuff, we would say while q is less than words.size, and then you just go ahead and put the q++ in the loop. So this is an alternate way of doing the exact same thing. There's always 3 loops, usually three ways of doing the same thing. So those are some of the methods that are available to us. There's another way to use the add method. And so what we can do is we can specify an index position where we want to insert an element. So currently, what does words have in it? So basically, it's an array list with August and then June and then summer. But what if we want to go ahead and insert an element somewhere between, two of the elements? So what if we want to insert an element between June and summer? What we're going to do is we're going to specify the index position where we'd like to insert an element, and then all remaining elements to the right of that will just have their index positions shifted one to the right, like they'll increase index position by 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to say words.add of 2, and then you can have another word in here, so you can say swimming or something like that. And then what this does is it adds swimming to index position 2. So we can have a little comment here. So add swimming to index position 2 scoots summer over to index position 3. Okay, and now we can go ahead and verify that by printing. Either we could just run the get method, but we could go ahead and print our list again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and cut and paste this code where we were iterating through. I'm just going to cut and paste it so that it comes after the addition of the word swimming. And hopefully we'll be able to verify that swimming shows up in the right place after June, but before summer. So that's what we're going to do. And essentially we need to compile it and close it. And then we can right click on the class and press the main method. And indeed we have August, June, swimming, summer. So it was inserted in the right place. And now you can go ahead and do something else with it, right? So you could have said, if you want to add something to the beginning, you just put a 0 there. So you could say words.add of 0, and then you could say something else like hot. Okay, and now if you go ahead and run it, we should see hot appearing at the beginning of the list. And so that's why you see that there. So those are some of the methods. So we have isEmpty and size. And now if you went ahead and ran the isEmpty method, what do you think would happen? So now if we say system.out.println of words.isEmpty, this would clearly not return true, right? It would return false at this point because now we have elements that exist in the list. And now what we could do, the last method that I wanted to demonstrate, I realized this video might be a little bit shorter than some of the ones I've been doing recently, is the clear method. And so what the clear method does is it simply removes all elements from the list. And if you look at the documentation, it's an instance method. So you call it on a particular array list rather than just on the class as a whole. You call it on a particular instance, right, on a particular list. And then so if you call it, it's a void method, you don't set it equal to anything. You don't say x equals list.clear. You just say list.clear, and it has the effect of removing all elements from the list. So now if you say words.isEmpty here, it would be false, but what do you think it would return if we say words.clear right here? So now if we removes all elements from the list. Okay, so now if you go ahead and say compile and close, Now you can go ahead and run the main method, and now it says true. So indeed, the list is empty at the very end if you run this clear function. So that's some of the way that this works. And like I was saying, the reason why we spent that lesson on wrapper classes talking about integers and doubles and booleans and characters, which we had sort of learned about already, but we put it into an object-oriented perspective because now we can start to call some of these methods we can start to apply this to objects, because if we delete all this code and we try to just put ints into it, that is not going to work out for us. So we go ahead and say type in, and there's going to be an issue. It already underlines it in green, and it says unexpected type. And so now if you want to have integers, you would just want to put integer there instead. Or you could put strings, because you have to remember that string is an object, okay? You could have characters, but you can't put char. You would need to put character, and then you'd be talking about putting character objects, right? So you could say character A equals new character of, lowercase w or something like that. Remember, only one character at a time, and you remember that you need to have single quotations. So I suppose we could have done maybe one more method. I think what I'll do is I'll sort of backtrack some of the code that I deleted. Let's just do one more method while we have the time, so we can do contains. So what contains will do is it'll return true if an element belongs to the list and false otherwise, okay? So if you say system.out.println of words.contains of summer, then you can guess that that's going to return true. And this will be case sensitive. So now if you say system.out.println of words.contains of August in all caps, then you can expect that this is going to return false. So now we can go ahead and compile and close it, and you can see the true and false at the bottom. So that's just another way of basically searching to see if an element is contained within an array list. And if you wanted to do it for an array, you would basically have to iterate through and check one element at a time. And we're going to come up with some searching algorithms, some ways that you could come up and do that in a faster method. But that's going to be for a future video. But I think that's probably enough to say about this. So those are 6 of the methods. So you have the isEmpty, the size, the add, the get, the clear, and the contains. In the next video, we'll talk about the index of and the last index of methods in the context of string array list. And then we'll also talk about setting, the idea that you could modify objects in an array list. We'll also talk about removing elements from an array list. And we'll sort of put it back into the context of the person class that we were constructing through lessons 22 to 24, and really connecting these topics back together, because going forward after that, we will be talking about recursion and inheritance, and the topics will continue to get more difficult just a little bit more. So anyway, that's enough for now. So from Emails03, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.